My wife let friends secretly test if I was worth keeping. I read the chat, blocked the group, finalized divorce, and claimed self-respect for good. Free tests. That's what it took for my wife's friends to decide I was worth keeping. Too bad for them. I don't need anyone's permission to know my own value. It all started 6 months ago when she came home talking about this life-changing photography course, $800 for weekend workshops that would supposedly unlock her creative potential. I listened, asked questions about the curriculum, the instructor's credentials, even suggested we budget for it properly. My response, supportive but practical. Apparently that was test number 1. I had no idea I was being evaluated like some lab rat until last Friday night. We were having dinner with her circle. You know the type, the kind of women who turn every conversation into a therapy session and treat marriages like group projects. They were discussing some drama about another couple when her friend made an offhand comment that stopped me cold. At least he didn't react like most men would. Remember when we thought he'd blow up about the photography thing? The table went quiet. My wife's face flushed red, and suddenly everyone found their salads fascinating, but I caught it. The slip. The admission. Interesting choice of words, I said, setting down my fork. We thought he'd blow up. Almost sounds like it was planned. The friend tried to backtrack, laughing nervously about how she misspoke, but I wasn't buying it. I'd been married long enough to recognize the signs, the way they all exchanged glances, the sudden subject change, the fact that my wife hadn't said a word to defend the misunderstanding. When we got home, I didn't ask for an explanation. I stated what I knew. The photography course was a test. You wanted to see how I'd react to you spending money on something frivolous. She tried to deny it at first, but I've never been one to accept weak deflections. I simply waited. Silence has a way of making guilty people confess. And sure enough, the truth started spilling out. Her friends had convinced her that she needed to really know who she married. They planted the idea that she should test my reactions to various scenarios. The photography course was designed to see if I was controlling with money or supportive of her dreams. So, let me understand this correctly, I said, my voice calm but sharp. Instead of having an adult conversation about our financial priorities or your interests, you decided to run a social experiment on your husband. The way she squirmed told me everything. This wasn't just about money or photography. This was about respect, about whether I was worthy of being treated like an equal partner or just another variable in their little psychology games. It wasn't meant to hurt anyone, she mumbled. They just wanted to make sure you were good for me. I almost laughed. Almost. Good for you? I've been good to you for 3 years, but apparently my track record means less than their approval. Here's what really got under my skin. I had passed their test. My reaction had been exactly what any reasonable husband should be, supportive but financially responsible. But that wasn't the point anymore. The point was that they thought they had the right to test me in the first place. I walked to our bedroom and started changing clothes. She followed, asking where I was going. Out, I said simply. Unlike some people, I don't need to run my decisions by a committee first. I spent the evening at a sports bar, not because I needed to drink, but because I needed space to think. This wasn't just about one test. If they'd done it once, they'd done it before, and they'd do it again. When I came home, she was waiting up, ready to have the conversation. But I wasn't interested in apologies or explanations. I was interested in understanding the scope of what I was dealing with. How many tests? I asked directly. She hesitated, which told me the answer was more than one. How many? I repeated, my tone making it clear this wasn't a negotiation. 3, she whispered. 3 tests. 3 separate occasions where my wife and her friends had manipulated situations to evaluate my worthiness. 3 times I've been treated like a candidate for a position I thought I already held. I nodded slowly, processing this information. Then I did something that clearly wasn't in their playbook. I smiled. Well, I said, heading toward the bathroom. I guess we know what tomorrow's conversation is going to be about. She started to respond, but I closed the door behind me. Some conversations require preparation, and I had some thinking to do. If they wanted to play games, they were about to learn I don't just participate in games. I set the rules. The next morning, I didn't bring up the tests. I made coffee, read the news, and acted like everything was normal. My wife kept glancing at me, waiting for the explosion that wasn't coming. That seemed to unnerve her more than any argument would have. Around noon, I casually mentioned something that had been bothering me for weeks. You know what's funny? 3 months ago, you canceled our anniversary dinner last minute because your friends had some emergency girls' night. I remember thinking it was strange how quickly you chose them over us. Her face went pale. Bingo. Test number 2. That wasn't a test, she said quickly. That was just what? A coincidence that it happened to be the same night we'd been planning for weeks? The same night you'd specifically asked me to book the restaurant you'd been wanting to try? I watched her scramble for words. The truth was written all over her face, but I let her dig the hole deeper. My friends needed me, she tried weakly. Your friends needed to see if I'd throw a tantrum when my wife prioritized them over our marriage. And when I simply said, okay, we'll reschedule, that was another gold star on their little evaluation sheet. She couldn't deny it anymore. The second test had been about checking my reaction to being deprioritized. Would I be possessive, demanding, or would I be the understanding husband who rolled with the punches? I'd passed that test too. But here's what they hadn't counted on. I was starting to see the pattern. So, what was the third one? I asked directly. She shook her head, claiming she couldn't tell me, which was answer enough. The third test was either recent or still coming. That afternoon, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I knew exactly which friend was the ringleader of this operation, the one who always had an opinion about everyone else's relationship, the one who'd made that slip at dinner. I showed up at her workplace around 5. She worked at one of those boutique marketing firms where everyone thinks they're changing the world by selling organic soap. When she saw me in the lobby, her expression shifted from surprise to panic. "We need to talk," I said simply. She tried to brush me off, claiming she was busy, but I'd driven across town for this conversation. I wasn't leaving empty-handed. 5 minutes, I said. We can do this here in the lobby, or we can step outside. Your choice. She chose outside. Look, she started as soon as we hit the sidewalk. Whatever my friend told you, she told me enough. But I'm not here to play detective. I'm here to establish some boundaries. Her defensive posture told me everything. This woman thought she was protecting her friend by vetting her husband, like I was some kind of threat that needed monitoring. My marriage isn't your science project, I continued, my voice level but firm. And my wife isn't your client who needs relationship coaching from someone who's been divorced twice. That hit home. Her face flushed red. I'm trying to help her, she snapped. No, you're trying to control her. There's a difference. And here's what's going to happen going forward. The testing stops, the manipulation stops, the group evaluations of my character stop. She opened her mouth to argue, but I wasn't finished. Because here's what you don't understand. Every test you've run, I've passed. But the fact that you think you have the right to test me in the first place tells me exactly what kind of people you are. I started walking back to my car, then turned around one more time. And just so we're clear, if there's a third test coming, you might not like the results. That evening, my wife was unusually quiet. Her phone was buzzing constantly, but she wasn't checking it like she normally would around 8. She finally looked at me with something approaching guilt. She called you, didn't she? I said. She nodded slowly. Good. Then we're all on the same page now. But we weren't. Not really. Because that night I realized something that changed everything. I'd been approaching this like the problem was the testing. Like if I could just get them to stop evaluating me, we could go back to normal. But normal was the problem. Normal was my wife thinking it was acceptable to let her friends orchestrate experiments on our marriage. Normal was me having to prove my worth to people who should have been irrelevant to our relationship. I've been focused on passing their tests when I should have been questioning why I was taking them in the first place. The next few days were tense. My wife kept apologizing, promising that the tests were over, that she'd told her friends to back off, but something had shifted in me. Every interaction felt calculated now. Every conversation made me wonder if this was genuine or just another evaluation. Then exactly 1 week after my conversation with her friend, my wife brought up something that made my blood run cold. You know, she said carefully, maybe we should talk about your ambitions. Some people think you're too comfortable with where you are in life. Some people, not her, some people. I set down my coffee and looked at her directly. The third test wasn't coming, it was already here. Some people think you're too comfortable with where you are in life. I let those words hang in the air for a moment. Then I started laughing, not a bitter laugh or an angry one, a genuinely amused laugh that seemed to confuse her more than any reaction she'd been expecting. Let me guess, I said, wiping my eyes. These same people think I should be more ambitious. Maybe start that business I mentioned once, or go back to school, push harder for that promotion. She nodded slowly, clearly unsure where this was heading. And they probably suggested you bring this up casually, see how I react to criticism about my life choices. Test whether I'm defensive or if I take constructive feedback. Well, her silence was confirmation enough. Well, congratulations. You found my breaking point. Not because you questioned my ambitions, but because you're still running their playbook even after I told you to stop. I stood up and walked to our home office, She followed, asking what I was doing, but I didn't answer. I had a suspicion, and it was time to confirm it. I opened her laptop. She'd left her messaging app open, probably by accident. Or maybe subconsciously she wanted me to find it. Either way, there it was, a group chat called Girl Talk with her 3 closest friends. I scrolled up to 3 weeks ago. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. They hadn't just planned 3 tests. They documented everything. My responses, their analysis, their recommendations for follow-up scenarios. It read like a psychological evaluation report. Test 1. Financial Control Assessment. Subject responded supportively but practically to expensive course request. Showed no signs of financial abuse or control issues. Recommend proceeding to Test 2. Test 2. Priority and Possessiveness Check. Subject accepted last-minute cancellation of anniversary plans without argument. No possessive behavior detected. Some concern about lack of assertiveness. Proceed to final evaluation. Test 3. Ambition and Drive Analysis. Assess subject's reaction to constructive criticism about life goals. Determine if he's complacent or growth-oriented. I kept reading. They rated my responses on scales. Discussed my emotional intelligence scores. Debated whether my calmness was a positive trait or a sign of disengagement. But the part that really got to me was the thread from 2 days ago. I'm starting to think we might have pushed too far. He confronted me at work yesterday. What did he say? He basically told me to stay out of their marriage. He wasn't rude, but he was scary calm. Maybe we should dial it back. One more test. If he handles the ambition conversation well, we tell her to keep him. If not, we have enough data to recommend counseling or worse. I turned the laptop screen toward my wife, who had gone completely white. Data, I said quietly. You've been collecting data on your husband. She started to stammer an explanation, but I held up my hand. I want you to read this out loud, I said, pointing to one particular message. This one from your friend yesterday. She shook her head, but I wasn't asking. Read it. Her voice cracked as she read. Honestly, if he passes this last test, she should definitely keep him. Guys like him are rare, but if he fails, she needs to know what she's dealing with. Keep him, I repeated slowly, like, I'm a stray dog you're deciding whether to adopt. The silence stretched between us. I could see her trying to formulate an apology, an explanation, anything that might fix this. But there was nothing to fix. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a mistake. This was a deliberate, calculated invasion of our marriage by people who thought they knew better than us. You want to know something funny? I said, closing the laptop. I would have passed their 3rd test too. I would have listened to their concerns about my ambitions, acknowledged their points, maybe even agreed to set some new goals because that's what mature adults do when presented with feedback. I walked toward the bedroom, then stopped. But here's what they never tested for. They never checked to see if I was the kind of man who would tolerate being treated like a psychology experiment. They never evaluated whether I'd accept being judged by people who don't even know me. She was crying now, apologizing, begging me to understand that she just wanted to be sure that her friends had convinced her it was normal, that she'd never meant for it to go this far. The worst part isn't even the testing, I continued. It's that you thought so little of your own judgment that you needed a committee to validate your choice in husband. 3 years of marriage, and you still weren't sure if I was worth keeping. I started packing a bag, not dramatically, not angrily, just methodically putting clothes into a suitcase like I was going on a business trip. Where are you going? She asked. Away. I need time to think about whether I want to be married to someone who treats our relationship like a group project. She panicked then, promising to cut contact with those friends, swearing she'd never let anyone influence her again, begging me not to leave. It's too late for promises, I said calmly. You already showed me who you are. All of you did. As I headed for the door, my phone buzzed. A text from her friend, the ringleader. We need to talk. This has gone too far. I showed the message to my wife. Even now, I said, she thinks she gets to control the narrative, thinks she can fix what she broke. I typed back a simple response. You're right. It has gone too far, but we're way past talking. Then I blocked her number and the numbers of the other 2 friends in their little evaluation committee. My wife watched me do this, and I could see the reality finally hitting her. This wasn't just about the tests anymore. This was about respect, trust, and the fundamental question of whether our marriage was ours or theirs. I can fix this, she whispered. No, I said, shouldering my bag. You can't, because the damage isn't in what you did. It's in what you thought you had the right to do. I walked out the door, leaving behind 3 years of marriage and a wife who was just now realizing that some tests have consequences the testers never considered. I'd been staying at a hotel for 3 days when the unexpected call came. It wasn't from my wife like I'd been expecting. It was from her friend, but not one of the 3 architects of this disaster. This was the quiet one, the one who rarely spoke up in group settings but always seemed to be watching everything unfold. "I know you probably don't want to hear from any of us right now," she said when I answered, "but I need to tell you something." I almost hung up. Almost. But something in her voice made me pause. "I never agreed with what they were doing," she continued quickly, sensing my hesitation. "I told them from the beginning that it was wrong, but they wouldn't listen." "And yet you said nothing to me," I replied. "You're right, I should have warned you. I should have told my friend to stop. But I hoped they'd come to their senses before it went too far." I sat down on the hotel bed, suddenly curious about what this conversation was really about. "Why are you calling me now?" "Because they're planning to double down. They think if they can just explain their reasoning to you, make you understand they were trying to protect her, that you'll see it their way." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Protect her from what? From having a stable marriage?" "That's exactly what I told them yesterday. I finally had enough and said what I should have said months ago." She went quiet for a moment, then continued. "I told them they were destroying the best thing that ever happened to her, that you were the kind of husband most women pray for, and they were sabotaging it with their paranoid games." "What did they say to that?" "They said I didn't understand because I'd never been married, that I couldn't see the red flags they were protecting her from." "Red flags," I repeated, "like being financially responsible, respecting her decisions, and not throwing tantrums when plans change. I know how insane it sounds. I've been watching them tear apart your marriage for months, and I kept telling myself it wasn't my place to interfere. But when I saw those messages yesterday, when I realized they were rating you like some kind of performance review," her voice cracked slightly, "I lost it. I told them they were toxic, that they'd taken a good man and turned him into their personal entertainment, that if she lost you, it would be their fault." "And what did my wife say during this confrontation?" "That's the thing. She wasn't there. They have a separate chat without her now. They've been planning their next move, deciding how to handle this situation you've created by standing up for yourself." My blood pressure spiked. Even after everything, they still thought this was about managing me rather than acknowledging what they'd done wrong. "They want to stage an intervention," she continued. "Get everyone together, have a big group discussion about communication and understanding different perspectives, like a therapy session run by the people who caused the problem in the first place." "Exactly. And I told them that if they tried that, I'd tell you everything they've been saying behind your back." I was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Here was someone who'd watched this train wreck unfold and finally found the courage to speak up. But was it too little, too late? "Why should I believe you're any different from them?" I asked directly. "Because I never participated. I never voted on your responses or analyzed your behavior. When they asked me what I thought about the photography course test, I told them it was manipulative. When they planned the anniversary dinner cancellation, I said it was cruel. And when they started talking about testing your ambitions, I told them they were going to lose a good friend if they didn't stop. But you never told me. No. And I'll regret that for the rest of my life. I prioritized keeping peace in the group over doing what was right. I'm not proud of that." Her honesty was unexpected. In 3 days of anger and betrayal, no one had simply admitted they'd been wrong without trying to justify it. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Nothing. I just wanted you to know that not everyone thought what they were doing was okay, and I wanted to warn you about their intervention plan so you could avoid it if you wanted to." "What about my wife? What's her position in all this?" She sighed heavily. "She's confused. She knows she messed up, but they keep telling her that your reaction proves you have control issues, that a secure man would be able to laugh off their concerns and move forward." "Control issues," I said slowly, "because I won't tolerate being psychologically evaluated by people who aren't qualified to judge anyone's relationship. I know it's backwards. They've convinced themselves that your boundaries are actually character flaws." I stood up and walked to the hotel window, looking out at the city lights. "You know what the real tragedy is?" I said. "If they just talked to me like adults, asked their questions directly, we could have had normal conversations about any concerns they had. Instead, they chose deception and manipulation." "I know. And I told them that too. I said you were the most straightforward person I'd ever met. That if they wanted to know something about your character, all they had to do was ask. But that wouldn't have given them the control they wanted." "Exactly." We talked for another 10 minutes. She filled me in on more of their behind-the-scenes discussions, their plans for damage control, their attempts to reframe the situation as a misunderstanding rather than a betrayal. Before we hung up, she said something that stuck with me. For what it's worth, I think she should fight for you. Not because her friends approve, but because she's about to lose something irreplaceable. But I don't think she realizes that yet. After the call ended, I sat in the quiet hotel room and thought about what she'd said. Someone in that group finally understood what was really at stake here. But understanding and action were two different things. My phone buzzed with a text from my wife. "Please come home. We need to talk." I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "We've talked enough. The question now is whether you're ready to choose." Choose what? Them or me? Because you can't have both. The intervention happened anyway, not at our house like they had originally planned, but at the ringleader's place. My wife called me that evening, sobbing, trying to explain what had just occurred. "They ambushed me," she said through tears. "I thought we were just meeting for coffee, but they had this whole presentation prepared." I listened without comment as she described how her 3 friends had cornered her with printouts of our text conversations, analysis of my behavior patterns, and a PowerPoint presentation about healthy relationship dynamics. And then she spoke up. My wife continued. "The one who called you?" She told them they were insane. According to my wife, the quiet friend had finally exploded. She'd stood up in the middle of their intervention and delivered what sounded like a devastating reality check. She said, "I was about to lose the best husband any of them had ever seen, and it was their fault," my wife recounted. She told them they'd been so busy looking for problems that they had created them. But here's the part that really got my attention. The defending friend had apparently turned to my wife and said something that cut right to the heart of everything. She looked me in the eye and said, "Keep him. Stop listening to these people and keep your husband, because if you lose him over this nonsense, you'll spend the rest of your life regretting it." I could hear my wife crying harder as she told me this. "And then what happened?" I asked. "They turned on her, called her naive, said she didn't understand the complexities of marriage, that she was too inexperienced to have an opinion. And what did you do?" Silence. Long, telling silence. "I didn't defend her," my wife whispered finally. "I sat there while they attacked the only person in that room who was standing up for our marriage." That admission hit harder than anything else she could have said. Even when presented with someone fighting for us, she'd chosen the group over the individual who was actually right. "But I realize now how wrong I was," she continued quickly. "I came home and I've been thinking about everything she said. She's right. They are toxic. I should keep you. I should fight for us." "Should?" I repeated. Interesting word choice. "What do you mean you should keep me? Like it's a decision you're still making, like you're weighing the pros and cons and might conclude that yes, on balance, I'm worth holding on to." "That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. Even now, you're talking about me like I'm an option you're considering rather than the man you married." I could hear her scrambling to find the right words, but the damage was done. The language she'd chosen revealed everything about how she still saw this situation. "The friend who defended me was right about one thing," I continued. "You are about to lose me, but not because your friends manipulated you. You're losing me because even after everything that's happened, you still don't understand what's wrong with what you did." "I do understand." "No, you don't. Because if you understood, you wouldn't be calling me to tell me I should be grateful that one person in your circle finally decided I was worth keeping." I walked to the hotel window again, looking out at the same view I'd been staring at for 4 days. "Here's what you still don't get. I don't need anyone's permission to exist in my own marriage. I don't need validation from your friends, approval from your committee, or a recommendation from the one person who finally figured out I'm not the enemy." But she was defending you. She was defending basic human decency, the bare minimum of respect that should exist in any relationship, and the fact that you think I should be grateful for that tells me you still don't understand the scope of what went wrong here. My wife was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want me to do?" she asked finally. "I want you to stop asking me what I want you to do. I want you to figure out what you think is right and do it without consulting anyone else, without running it by the group, without needing permission or approval or analysis." "I have figured it out. I want to save our marriage." "Then you should have figured that out 3 tests ago. You should have figured that out when they suggested evaluating your husband like a job candidate. You should have figured that out when the person defending me got attacked and you said nothing." I paused, letting that sink in. "But you didn't. And now you're asking me to be grateful that after months of psychological warfare, one person finally stood up and said, 'Hey, maybe we shouldn't destroy this marriage for sport.'" "So what now?" she asked quietly. Now you live with the consequences of treating your marriage like a group project. Now you explain to people why your husband isn't coming to family dinners anymore. Now you figure out how to rebuild trust that you systematically demolished. Are you saying it's over? I'm saying that your friend was right about one thing. You should have kept me, past tense, because the man who would have stayed through anything, who would have worked through any problem, who would have forgiven almost any mistake, that man checked out when he realized his wife needed a committee to decide if he was worth loving. But I do love you. You love the version of me that passes tests. You love the me that gets approval from your friends. But you've never loved me enough to trust your own judgment about who I am. I hung up the phone and immediately turned it off. There would be more calls, more tears, more promises to change. But the damage was done. The defending friend had been right. My wife should have kept me, should have fought for us from the beginning, should have told her friends that her marriage wasn't their business. But she hadn't, and by the time she figured out what she was losing, I'd already figured out what I was worth. 2 weeks later, I signed the divorce papers, not out of anger or spite, but out of clarity. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. My wife had shown me that she valued group consensus over individual respect. The final twist came when her defending friend reached out one last time. She'd cut ties with the other 3 and apologized for not speaking up sooner. She also shared something that crystallized everything for me. After you left, they tried to convince her that your reaction proved they were right about you. They said a good husband would have laughed it off and moved on. That told me everything. Even in defeat, they couldn't accept responsibility. They turned my refusal to be disrespected into evidence that I deserved disrespect. My wife made one final attempt to reconcile. She showed up at my hotel with proof that she'd blocked all 3 friends, deleted their numbers, and ended those toxic relationships. I chose you, she said. I finally chose you. You chose me after I forced your hand, after I walked away, after someone else had to tell you I was worth keeping. That's not a choice. That's damage control. She broke down completely then, realizing that her grand gesture was meaningless. You can't unring a bell. You can't unfeel the betrayal of discovering your spouse thinks so little of their own judgment that they need committee approval for their marriage. The papers were finalized on a Tuesday. She kept the house. I kept my dignity, and we both kept the expensive lesson about what happens when you treat love like a psychology experiment. 6 months later, I heard through mutual friends that she'd tried to reconcile with her former circle. Apparently, they'd welcomed her back with open arms and immediately started analyzing why her marriage had really failed. Some people never learn. The defending friend sent me a message on the day the divorce was final. I'm sorry we couldn't save it. I wrote back, it was never yours to save. She was right about one thing, though. My ex-wife should have kept me. But by the time she figured that out, I'd already figured out something more important. I didn't need to be kept by someone who thought I needed to be tested first. Real love doesn't require validation from committees. Real trust doesn't need external approval. And real respect doesn't come with conditions. I learned that when you treat someone like a science experiment, you lose the right to be surprised when they leave the lab.